Okay, thank you everyone for coming to this session. The session is how can we engage the public through citizen science? And just to start off, we will have a poll asking the one question is how do you think we can best engage the public through citizen science? So the poll is running on Slido. Make sure to give your suggestions to us. We've one change to the programme is that we've Brian Caffrey sitting in for Ricky Whelan representing Birdwatch Ireland. So thank you, Brian, for coming at short notice. Where's my, oops. Okay, there's the poll. Can I move on to my first opening slide? Okay, so the objective of this workshop is, well, we were asked to look at three questions. The first is, what exactly is citizen science? It's a word that's bandied about quite a bit, but I just want to give an introduction, or we want to ask the question exactly, what is citizen science? Meant to explore what makes the public want to get involved and how can we encourage more people to take part in citizen science. And the third is, how does citizen science support better biodiversity management, and can the public and organisations involved work together to amplify their impact? So this is basically the questions that are going to frame this session. And I just want to say a couple of words, really, by introduction to what is citizen science. So the presentation, I'm going to make a few introductory remarks just about citizen science, and I'm going to just make a few suggestions from the data centre's perspective on what we think is needed, and these are to help the debate. And then we have Amanda Pedlow, who's Heritage Officer with Offaly County Council. She's done a lot of work with citizen scientists in terms of engagement. Simon Berrow from the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group. Aughney from Bat Conservation Ireland. And as I say, Brian from Birdwatch Ireland. And we'll be followed then by an opportunity, hopefully with plenty of time for questions and answers afterwards. Just to kind of set the scene is that citizen science is a discipline in its own right. It's a term we bandy around, but it is a discipline in its own right. And it's really a spectrum of activities that people who engage in a voluntary capacity do. And it runs from, I suppose, in the broader sense, it's an opportunity for people to get out, explore their environment, and in a casual way engage with it and document what's there. So it's kind of, from one sense, it's from the engagement right through to the side where there's quantitative surveys being done, and people, although they're working in a voluntary capacity, they're actually generating data that's to a professional standard. And there's everything in between this perspective. It's the European Citizen Science Association that has come up with kind of the 10 key principles of citizen science. And they're listed here. I'm just going to run through very briefly what they are. So they should be principles that underline any citizen science engagement or survey. It is about engaging citizens in scientific endeavour to generate new knowledge and understanding of a question. Citizen science should have a scientific outcome. It should be there to ask a question and get people out there surveying to answer that question. An effective citizen science project should be mutually beneficial to both the professional scientists or the organisations who are running it and the citizen scientists or the volunteers who are actually participating in that survey. There's also a well-designed citizen science survey should facilitate citizen scientists to be involved at different stages, not just doing the donkey work, doing the field work, but they should be involved in survey design and actually in reporting and analysis if they have the capacities to do it. Any good citizen science project should provide feedback in a timely fashion to the people involved to motivate them and give them feedback on activities. Citizen science, as I mentioned, is an approach like any other. It is a strong way to get good quality data, but like any research projects, there's limitations and biases, and those have to be factored into the analysis of those results. A sound principle is that citizen science information and data should be, where possible, made freely available. It should be open data. And citizen scientists should be really acknowledged in the results and any publications that accrue from that. And again, similarly, like any output, the analysis should be done to look at the quality. And there's the other thing about legal and ethical issues around copyright, intellectual property, data sharing and stuff. So this just to contextualize, I suppose, what the definition of a citizen science project should be and what are the underlying principles for a good one. Oops, what's happening here? Oh, there we are. I just want to say a small bit before I move on to this slide about the National Biodiversity Data Centre. We play an important role, we hope, in terms of citizen science and have given it a national profile since we were established. The National Biodiversity Data Centre, we don't have 40 staff. We've got 7 core staff. We were established in 2007, and I suppose there's 3 key functions. Our role is to document Ireland's biodiversity. We're still in an age of discovery in biodiversity, even with Ireland. We don't know what species we have yet in Ireland and how they're distributed. We want to track change in Ireland's countryside to know how biodiversity is changing. And the other role is that we want to try to make information, as much information available as possible, that it can be available to feed into policy and decision makings and land management issues, so that we want the data to be used for decision making. I suppose since the data centre was established, what we have now is we have a national focus on what we call, well, when we were established was what was called biological recording. Citizen science is the new word for that, but we do have a national focus for that. So anyone who's out there and wants to engage in biodiversity in their locality, they now have a structure in which their observations can be submitted directly to the data centre. They know that information will be taken on board and used. And the President mentioned earlier that we have hundreds of thousands of observations submitted to the data centre, and last year was a key year for us because for the first year in 2018, more than 100,000 observations were submitted to the data centre directly by in excess of about 8,000 recorders, which is a great amount of activity. We've built a national infrastructure, which we hope, it's a state-of-the-art infrastructure. We hope it's fit for purpose to actually serve the biological recording or citizen science recording community. And that information there, that infrastructure rather, is there, and it's offered by way of shared services to partner organisations that they can use free of charge. And we also have a role, I think, in providing national coordination where appropriate, so that we can build capacity across the sector. We provide training, build capacity, and hopefully working with partners that we can benefit from each other's strengths. One of the principles that we run in terms of citizen science engagement and survey work, and actually in all of the work that we do, is that we want to complement existing activity that is out there. We want to try to add our support and help existing initiatives rather than providing any duplication of effort. That's not what we're about. And I suppose, again, I've mentioned the fact is that the state, the National Parks and Wildlife Service and the Heritage Council have actually invested in the infrastructure, and we were offering that by way of shared services to partner organisations that they can use, with the hope that, and our vision is that the state should invest in the infrastructure, and it means that our partners can avail of that so that they don't have to spend unnecessary resources in building infrastructure and IT solutions, but rather they can focus on what they do well. That's in terms of survey design, asking the survey questions that are needed, mobilising a network of volunteers. A lot of the organisations have very strong networks of volunteers. They can engage with the network, train them, and more importantly then they have the skill to actually analyse the data, interpret the data and report on the data to try to change or influence policy and advocate for nature conservation. So that really, I'm not going to say much more, but I see that's our role. I think we have a role in providing a national focus, and I'd like to think that we can provide infrastructure and supports that will help and complement other partners and let the other partners do and spend their finite resources or infinite resource, no, the opposite there, resources on what they can do well. Just by way of summing up, I do think that there's a role for us to work together to try to advocate better for citizen science, and that we should come together to try to send a strong message to government that actually citizen science is a very valuable activity, but it's not cheap labour, that we have to invest in it, and that there are resources. It's very cost effective, but there are resources that should be made available. One of the things I'm saying, I think there's 4 things that we should try to do, and these are questions or issues perhaps that you could consider in terms of your questions, if this is an appropriate way to go. I think we should advocate for citizen science. It shouldn't be viewed as an easy option, but if it's managed well activity, it can provide real benefits to the scientists and actually to government and NGOs. I think we should have a shop window to showcase biodiversity citizen science activities in Ireland. There's an awful lot of very good work that's happening out there, and I think it's good for us to showcase the amount of work that's happening. But I do think we need adequate resources to be factored in to the development of any citizen science projects, and we should advocate for that. And of course, if we don't get the funding, we always have to cut our cloth to what we have, but we should be trying to make a case that citizen science needs proper investment. Again, we should collaborate together. We work closely with a lot of partners, and frankly, we don't work as close as we should with others, and I'd like to hear your views on that. We should try to avoid duplication of effort at all costs and ensure that across the board best practice, data are shared and best practices are shared widely. Again, I think what would be very useful, and perhaps what we could provide, is a kind of an information portal where we can bring together the various different biodiversity citizen science initiatives, so we can show the totality of what's happening out there and actually direct people. If you're interested in birds, maybe these are the surveys that Birdwatch Ireland operate. You should go and talk to them, or if it's cetaceans, or if it's a local community. So this kind of overarching information portal, I think, would be very useful. I do think we have a role in terms of national coordinating of citizen science. I think there's strength in numbers, and I think if we can work together, I think we can make a stronger case to government to give funding and to help build capacity across the sector. And I suppose the one thing I would suggest, if there was one outcome from this, and this is a suggestion, I think it would be very good if we could develop maybe a biodiversity citizen science strategy for Ireland. That might be one of the seeds or one of the outcomes from today's session. Now, these are only suggestions. I'd like to hear what you think. So they were just by way of introductory remarks. So can I ask Amanda to come up and talk about the work that she's doing with Offaly County Council?
Good afternoon. So my role is with Offaly County Council as the Heritage Officer, one of the many counties where the Heritage Officer covers biodiversity and the other aspects of heritage. And we have a number of actions in the Heritage Plan that cover biodiversity, but not many, because pragmatically we can't deliver that many actions. And I suppose when we started off doing Heritage Plans, we listed a huge amount of actions, so everybody could look in and say, oh great, the action that I asked for is in there. But then we realised, as we got more experienced with time and resources, what we could deliver and what we couldn't deliver. So we have 3 specific actions in the Heritage Plan for Offaly at the moment relating to biodiversity, and one is on invasive species, one on the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, and one on working with citizen science and the data centre. Now, we've had a lot today, I suppose, about specialists, and a lot of people here are probably involved or have commissioned or work with scientific surveys that, of course, are submitted straight to the data centre. What we're going to talk about specifically here is the citizen science aspect of it. Again, a lot of the feedback, a lot of the polls have been saying things about trying to talk about educate, reach, community, grassroots. A lot of the plans and strategies have said, look, until they start reaching out into the wider community, you know, we're going to be stuck. We have to get more reach. So I suppose a couple of years ago, the data centre redesigned their whole interface for citizen science, and it really changed everything completely. Because before that, you could enter your species, but there wasn't really the feedback, or it wasn't easy, and there was much less. It was much harder to get the feedback. So the redesign a couple of years ago of the data centre's citizen science portal, it has really changed everything. It's made it extremely easy for people to be able to submit records. Now, in Offaly, we've got the Offaly Naturals Field Club. They're not in every county. We have a very strong bank of voluntary leaders. And again, I suppose coming back to the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, where Una was saying this morning that you could keep waiting and keep waiting for something to happen, or you can get up and do what you can do with the resources that you have. And I suppose the advantage of working at a county level is that you do get a chance to meet people and work at a local community level. So Offaly County Council spends about €250 a year on printing the Field Club brochure. All of the leaders are volunteers, and really the cost is minimal. It's really a logistics exercise in arranging it, but it means that there's a resource within Offaly where people who are interested in recording can get out. And I suppose the two key things are that the Field Club does. It gets them to meet leaders who know what they're talking about and other key members as part of that group. And it also, you very often get to sites that you mightn't get to otherwise. So it gives the plus on both sides. And of course, we're encouraging members through the Field Club to submit their records. So, as I said, the main focus is that it's citizen science, and I know that the data centre have to spend a lot of time validating records. And of course, they have to validate them because they're not coming in from specialists, so there's going to be mistakes. You know, and sometimes people ring me up and they say, oh, I made a dreadful mistake. I put in some things instead of something else. Now, there is a button you can alert the data centre to, where you can kind of put in a comment to say, can you just recheck this record? But overall, it's not going to be 100%. And I suppose that's a very important message to get out, is that they're not asking for the scientific, I'm professional data. It's to encourage citizen science focus. So that's very important to get on and give it a try. And I'm always saying to people, whatever you're confident about, put in that record. Don't feel you have to go out on site and put in a full species list. Whatever you're confident of, put it in. So I suppose I've been talking to a lot of the recorders on an ongoing basis, and I think it's interesting really to look from their point of view of what do they get as recorders, because there's been a lot of talk today about how data can come in and be used to form policy, and from that perspective, but from the user on the ground, what are they saying? So a number of comments have been, I had no idea how many species I had seen until I started logging them. People were keeping species lists, maybe in a journal at home, and maybe if you'd said to them at the end of the year, what did you see during the year? Well, maybe I saw 100 things, or maybe I saw 150 things. But actually, when you start actually having your lists compiled, when you go onto the data centres, you can go onto the league and you can see how many records you've put in, and you can also see how many records other people have put in. So there's that element of appearing, you can choose if you want to, your records, your data to go public or not. But a lot of people like that satisfaction of feeling that even though they're on their own, in the countryside, recording something by themselves, that they're part of something bigger. And that's hugely important. So another quotation was, while spending time on holiday, I feel that I'm part of a national programme and that I'm doing something worthwhile on my walks. So it's not what Liam was saying, sometimes people could say about cheap labour. It's far more about being valued. I'm out, doing my bit. I'm not just walking for 2 hours and just sitting down having a cup of tea and saying that's today done. I'm actually logging everything that I've seen, and I know that my afternoon has contributed to a national database, and what I've seen has contributed to the information that can go ahead for policy. Another aspect is a walk used to take 20 minutes. Now it's 2 hours and books out when I get home. This is quite an important one. I think that people might go along and they think, I saw a godwit, but then which one was it? Better go and check that up. So there's a lot more motivation. Instead of just saying, I think it's a such and such, people are going back, getting out their books and saying, it's really important that I check. And that's what I need to look for the next time I'm out, to see which godwit it is, which species it is. So people are finding that it's a value when they actually put in the time to drill down and get more definitive species identification. So I'm looking a lot closer to be sure of the ID, rather than just thinking I knew what it was. A lot of people giving that feedback that it's worth doing that. On the right is the Recorders League, and a lot of people love that aspect to it. And it was mentioned earlier on, Una talked about the competition with the tidy towns, and very often people in Ireland are motivated, people I'm sure worldwide are motivated by competitions. And some people, it's done by county as well. And last year, for a long time, the number of records and species, Dublin and Offaly were very close. And you'd hear some people saying, well, I'm going to go put those records up before Dublin gets ahead of us again. You know, and it's only fun, but it just gives a feeling that when you put on your records, you can see straight away, you know, where your records are being recorded, and you can also see then how each county is performing and who's recording well. It's a really handy way to store and search my records. So again, lots of people having notebooks upon notebooks at home, and they're just lists and lists, and they're going nowhere. Whereas now you can go back into your own records that just you can access, and you can think, when did I see that barn owl? And you can just search by barn owl, and up it come that it was 2 years ago in April, and it was just outside Mount Lucas. So it's a great way, as Liam said, instead of groups and individuals trying to work out how are they going to keep their records, this is a fabulous service that we're being provided with nationally that a lot of people are enjoying using and keeping. The other thing you can do is you can search by area. So you can look up, say, 10 kilometres square. So if you're going away for the weekend and you want to print out a 10 kilometres square of what's been seen where you're going, and it might be a different habitat than you're used to seeing, then you might think, oh, I wonder what species are here, or could I have seen that? You know, if you're not maybe confident, and you could go and think, oh yes, there's been lots of records for that here. It's not the habitat I'm used to. So you can get a checklist of what's been seen where you're going in advance, which is terribly helpful. Referring to the habitats, then people would be used to, then they'd say, I've kind of recorded everything in my local habitat. So I think maybe I'll go across and maybe go to Raised Bog because I'm slipping down the league, I want to get another 20 records in. So it's a bit of fun to make you explore new habitats and open up new worlds, and obviously meeting new people in that journey. So there's a huge amount of pluses from having a professional recording system that is designed and shaped for recorders. If you scroll down to the bottom of the records page, when you go onto the home page, it's got recent record images. And that's incredibly helpful. A huge amount of people talk about that they scroll down and they can start to see, oh, people are beginning to record such and such. I should start looking out for that. So it's not just the swallows, but any flowers that, say, are beginning to come into season. Oh, and particularly the strong recording in Wexford Field Club. Oh, things are beginning to flower there. They'll be coming up through the country. We'll look out for that in Offaly shortly. Yep. So, as I say, there's particular focuses then for butterfly recording, New Year recording challenge, and so on. So there's constant motivation from the data centre to get recording and to get people involved. So for those of you who are recording, I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am and the recorders in Offaly. And for those of you that haven't, give it a go. It's a fabulous and rewarding experience to be involved in.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Can I just remind everyone there's an opportunity to ask any questions through Slido. So please, if you hear anything, if any question, please use that facility. Okay, next up, Simon from the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group.
Thank you, Liam. Little did we know 28 years ago when we set up the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group that we were establishing what now is one of the longest running citizen science schemes in Ireland. I didn't know what citizen science was. I don't really like the name, but the motivation was we were a group of people interested in whales and dolphins, and we didn't know enough about them to come up with anything thoughtful, conservation, policies, actions, pressures, threats. I'll skip through a bit about how the mistakes were made. I know most of you here are probably involved in some kind of recording schemes, but maybe in a marine context we have different constraints. They're probably more valuable because of the rare opportunities to get out and record enigmatic things like whales and dolphins. So we've got plenty of records now. And probably like most of you, we had a network of people who are interested in recording. We tried to communicate. We tried to get better geographical coverage, seasonal coverage. But it took probably 10 years of faffing around, really making our own mistakes before we put structure on our recording scheme. And it was under a project called iScope, which was a multi-agency funded project. We did 3 years, and 3 years back in the day was like a lifetime's worth of funding. I couldn't believe it when we got 3 years funding from the different agencies. And it enabled us to put the resources into supporting a network of people by doing training courses, by producing resources, identification guides, things like that. All the sort of things really that the Record Centre are doing so well now, or the Biodiversity Data Centre are doing so well now. And one of the key things, I suppose, has always been data validation, is we put a lot of effort into making sure that the data is robust. Some of you have probably been insulted over the years by our sighting and stranding officers. I apologize now. But that ability to make sure it is what it is and that the data is robust so that we can look at trends is absolutely critical. And I feel if that's not in place, then the science is really not much good. It might be engagement, but it's of no use to inform policy. So you can see the black arrows here is where iScope kicked in, if you like. So first 10 years, I suppose, was finding our feet. And since iScope, we feel like we've got a good scheme in place that is recording data in a robust fashion, in a consistent manner, that we can start looking at trends. So the trends here are slightly different. The top corner is sightings. So we can see we're getting about 1,500 sightings every year coming in through the group, validated, data-based, and it can show us things that are turning up or not turning up. Where the stranding scheme is actually the opposite. The number of strandings is going up. We feel this isn't due to recorder effort, it's because there's more strandings coming in. So we're confident that the data is robust because we've been very aggressive about the validation system. Just a couple of nice stories. One nice story, it's taken, if you look at the bottom line there, it's taken us 20 years to show that there's an increase in humpback whales in Irish waters. Great news stories, support marine tourism, get people the opportunity to go out and see these magnificent creatures. These are, the graph shows photo IDs. These are individually recognizable humpback whales that we record in Irish waters over the last 20 years. Nearly all of it is through citizen science. There's no dedicated PhD student research, IRC funded, there's nothing. It's just people going out with their nice digital cameras, taking pictures and sending them to us. So that's really fantastic. But it took 20 years. Here's another one. This is this year, a more depressing story. The biggest UME, unusual mortality event in the history of the world for beaked whales, which are these deep diving offshore species. We'd normally get 2 or 3 a year. We got 29 beaked whale strandings in 2 months. And that was matched by a similar event in Scotland and a similar event in Iceland. And they're all connected. But the signal of this unusual event, which is probably linked to naval sonar, we don't know yet, was first detected in Ireland. And it meant that when we saw this unusual event, we knew, because our citizen science scheme was robust and working well, that this was a real effect and not just an artifact. So we were confident in the data. So how do we get to that position? And what are the key elements that I think for a successful recording scheme? Well, as I said, data validation is really important, and we beat ourselves up over that. In the early days, we decided, because we didn't have any money and we were a small group, that we'd embrace the digital revolution. So we did everything through our website, and we're very proud of it at the time, both online records, data validation, access to the data. A key policy we had was that we didn't own the data was owned by the recorder, but if we took your data point and added it to another data point, then it had value. The value increased because we could share it. So we were obliged to make people who recorded data to access that data. It all sounds like, well, of course, Simon, isn't that what the Record Centre are doing so well? It is now, but back in the day it wasn't. So we were quite proud that we were on the kind of forefront of the digital revolution. I feel now we're actually being left behind. And one of the things easier in the early days was that there wasn't many digital platforms to report records to. And now we're struggling that there's so many social media platforms with Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, is that we're not the go-to people to send records to. You've got many options now. And that can confuse a recorder, that can dilute the records coming in. And also, we're making it easy for people, and sometimes we're making it too easy for people. We need to tell people, you need to be robust. When we challenge your species ID, it's not because we're being rude, it's because we want to make sure it is what it is to protect the good records. And if you dumb it down too much, you don't get that, and the quality will suffer. So I have my concerns about where that's going long term. We have to go searching Facebook and Twitter and all these other things that I can't spell to try and find these records because we're not getting access to them as easy as we were. One thing we need to do is create a sense of ownership, and this is based on respect, and that whole idea of giving people back the information and communicating the message, communicating the story, I think we could do much better. Again, the Biodiversity Data Centre are doing it really well, but it's, we heard a lot about that today, about communication. It's a big thing. I suppose one thing that we did find going the long way around in our recording schemes is that we had to start from scratch and bring people through. Had no previous history of recording, but we have a great sense of loyalty with those people. They're very loyal to us. But I'm finding that our schemes are dying because there's a natural wastage of people who life catches up with them and they don't keep recording. So you need to keep feeding new people. You need to keep these schemes going. And that, of course, requires support. Citizen science isn't for free. You know, it can be quite expensive if you do it properly. And how do you do that? How do you provide the support for 20, 30 years, which are the timescales you need to get useful trends and useful data? I don't think the Wildlife Service would welcome a sort of 20-year proposal for funding. So trying to find mechanisms to make that easy for people is kind of really important. I think that is a challenge, because there's nothing worse than creating a scheme with a 3-year funding, getting a motivated gang of recorders, and then with no funding left. We can't support you, we can't answer your questions. What are we going to do now? So the group, often the NGOs, have to keep going without the resources to back it up and hope that somebody will row in with the next check, you know? So, you know, how we smooth those bumps, how we get that long-term commitment, I don't know. But I think we need to, because as we know, investing in citizen science at the right level can give you unbelievably good value for money. Just to kind of, we mentioned a roadmap, I think was one of the things that was put to us. Do we have a roadmap for citizen science? I'm not too sure what a roadmap is, but I think that we need to lay standards down. If somebody's interested in doing a recording scheme, maybe we can help them with experience that's gone before. The services that the Biodiversity Data Centre supply at the minute and can supply down the road, given the support that we must maintain, are only fantastic, because all NGOs like ourselves face the same problems. So I think citizen science is really powerful. I think we need to engage people more, but we need to be careful that it's not just like an engagement exercise, that it does produce data that we can use, and hopefully we can kind of go on that journey together. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Colin Tina from Bat Conservation Ireland.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting Bat Conservation Ireland here today to talk about our Irish bat monitoring programme, whenever it comes up. Thank you. So I'm speaking on behalf of Bat Conservation Ireland, and myself and Niamh Roach are the coordinators of the Irish Bat Monitoring Scheme. And one of the principal objectives of my presentation today is to show you how amazing set of volunteers we have who have collated so much information on bat conservation over the last 16 years. So it was wonderful to hear about Birdwatch Ireland's 50th anniversary and the Irish Wildlife Trust's 40th anniversary yesterday, but in comparison, Bat Conservation Ireland is quite a teenager. And the amount of data that's been collected over the years is really very much in the last couple of decades. In the 1980s was primarily what the MPWS and the regional staff was collating and recording in regards to the lesser horseshoe roosts. The 1990s saw the bat groups being established, the Northern Ireland Bat Group. The 3 primary bat groups in the south was Cork, Galway and Dublin, and Galway is what got me into bat conservation. But in the 2000s there was a lot of questions being put out, kind of going, what is happening with our bats? Okay, we know a lot about lesser horseshoe bats, but what about the other bat species? And it wasn't until the Heritage Council grabbed the bull by the horn and kind of said, look, we need something to start collating information, but we're very conscious that in Ireland we didn't have that many trained bat workers. Indeed, we didn't have that many bat detectors. So what are we going to do? So they invited the Bat Conservation Trust in the UK to come over and put together a novel approach to actually collating data, and that was where the car-based bat monitoring scheme. And this literally snowballed, and literally, okay, what else can we do for the other bats? What questions do we need? What can the Centre of Irish Bat Research start answering in very good scientific data? And as a result, we have the Irish Bat Monitoring Scheme. Now, it's primarily comprised of 4 schemes, which is the car-based bat monitoring scheme, the Dove-Etten survey, brown long-eared survey, and the lesser horseshoe roost counts. So you can see that there are schemes tailored, surveys tailored for each of the different species, because bats are a little bit awkward. We can't just go out and survey them all in one way. We have to have separate surveys to get the robust monitoring population trend data for each species according to a particular survey scheme. And we also have the pilot woodland survey and Batless 2020. But the first 4 schemes are primarily what the Irish Bat Monitoring Programme is. So it is the data we're collecting is primarily as a result of phenomenal citizen scientists. We have so many volunteers, and this slide is literally from 2017 when 5 of our schemes were running that depend on citizen scientists. And as you can see, each of the pie chart shows the number of volunteers in each of the actual schemes. And we have some amazing volunteers. Some of them actually participate in more than one. We have even some surveyors that did all 5 surveys over the period of 2017, which is a phenomenal amount of time that they've given up to collate information on bats. And indeed, we collated that, we estimated that there was over 5,000 volunteer hours put together information on bats in 2017. That's a phenomenal resource. Now, how we went about it, our volunteer engagement, there's numerous platforms. We have our BC Ireland members. We have all of our mailing lists from the surveyors that would participate the year before. We contact them. How would you like to participate in the coming season? Social media, of course, press releases. When we have training courses in particular areas, we'll try and set up lots of radio interviews. And then we have a great relationship with many partners across the island, the heritage officers, the biodiversity officers, other wildlife NGOs, river trusts, county councils, anything we can tap into to actually organise a local training course, the tidy towns. We're quite happy to travel there and just bring people on board. We are very conscious that training is very important. And because we've got a number of different surveys, we use the Dolphins Waterway Survey as the entrance point for new people to bat surveying, because you're using bat detectors and there is a certain amount of training required. So we provide 15 training courses each year for the Dolphins survey, and then when people are happy with that, they can upscale and go into other surveys, but the Dolphins is the entry point. We have a lot of online support between our YouTube training clips, our bat call library, because we're all coming out of hibernation now, and we all have to remember what bats sound like before we go out for the season, and in survey manuals. The Irish Bat Monitoring Programme is a set of very strict, standardised methodologies, and we do need people to follow those quite strictly. So the information we're collating is robust, and this is where the added scientific benefit is. We're also very conscious that bat detectors are expensive. And so we have a library of bat detectors that we loan out to our volunteers. In relation to the car-based bat monitoring, it's very specialised detectors. So there's 28 survey squares, so there's 28 survey boxes. So we try not to increase the costs to our already wonderful volunteers that are giving up their time to do the surveys. So they go out, do their surveys, send us back the information whichever way is most amenable to them. We collate it, analyse it, report it, and then hopefully we're giving back as much feedback, personalised feedback on individual sites, the overall impact of their information for the overall population trends of the individual species that we're monitoring. So retaining volunteers is an extremely important part of our coordination process, and the more we retain the volunteers, the more robust our data is, because they're getting confident and they're reducing errors through experience when they're out surveying. We find that the Dolphin survey is, because it's an entry point, it attracts a lot of volunteers that have a passing interest. It's kind of like, okay, I'd like to find out what it's like to survey bats. And if they enjoy it, hopefully they'll come back and continue. And then if they enjoy that, they may participate in one of the other schemes. The car-based scheme is 28 teams. There's a team manager, and for them, they tend to commit a number of years to actually participating, because it takes time to become familiar with the equipment, to learn the routes, and to familiar with the methodology. And the same for the brown long-eared roost count. It's kind of like you have your roost, you learn the peculiarities of the brown long-eared bats. Anybody who works with these guys, they're fun to work out, they've got great character, and each site is slightly different, and you do need time to be able to learn what these guys are getting up to. The lessons we've learned, not everybody wants to sit in the car for 5 hours, which is what the car-based bat monitoring scheme requires. A lot of people like to go for a wee walk, which the Dolphin survey facilitates that, or they like to stand outside a roost and have a wee chit-chat as the count of bats coming out. So it's nice to have a number of different schemes that actually facilitate what the volunteers would like to do. I also feel that ownership is a very important element of a citizen science programme. The more the volunteers feel that their data is valuable, that they have control over what they're collecting, the more likely they will actually keep returning to us. And we have found that this ownership may be inversely related to the overall number of sites in the scheme. So just to give you an example, the car-based bat monitoring scheme is 28 30-kilometre squares, so there's 28 teams. So each of those, there's a phenomenal amount of data come from each individual team. While for the Dolphins waterway survey, for us to gather data, enough data to do population trends, we need over 200 waterway sites surveyed every year. So that's a much greater pool of surveys that are required. And as a consequence, that may be related to people, to greater turnover in the Dolphin survey. And same for the brown long-eared. Once people are happy with the brown long-eared sites, they tend to stick with us for a number of years. We've had people still with us since 2003, 2006 and 2007, respectively, for the different sites. Feedback, very, very important. People like to know how their sites are contributing to the data. For each of the schemes, we do, once the report is finished, we send out individual reports to each of the volunteers showing a summary of the data and how their site is faring, possibly in comparison to the other sites, or they can take a peek at what the other surveyors have collated as well. So it's a very important aspect. In 2016, we wanted to find out, are we doing things right for our volunteers? So we put together a questionnaire and sent it out to all our volunteers and asked them some questions to literally rate our performance. So thankfully, we are doing things right in a certain extent, but there's still a lot of things we could do and improve on. But overall, in relation to training, we got a 4.6 score out of 5, support 4.5, and feedback 4.3. So we're trying to address the feedback aspect and bring that up. Respondents have asked for further training and upskilling. And one of the other things is, back work is quite lonely. You're out at night time, you're wandering around. It's nice to talk to other people who do similar things. So bat groups are an essential component for us. Like, we've gotten a much greater number of bat groups all across the country now, and they're a focal point for people to actually have the chit chat, share experience, and again, a chance to upskill also. Okay. So that's really it. So one of the things that I would be quite concerned about a lot of citizen science programs is there a point where we saturate, where we actually ask too much? It's a great opportunity for citizen science to go out there and learn and to do surveys, but with our 5 programs in 2017, we felt that maybe 5 surveys going on in one summer was an awful lot to ask of people. And we just have to be conscious that there's only so many hours, free hours people have in the 24-hour or in the night. I'm sure you don't have to go to jobs, you can just do surveys first. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Can I just remind people to keep asking questions on Slido? I can see already there's 2 or 3 different groups of questions, and they'd be very helpful for us to frame our discussion after Brian has finished. So Brian, thank you.
Thanks, Liam. So I'm here today to represent Birdwatch Ireland and to talk to you about the work of Birdwatch Ireland in engaging citizen science. So I think a good starting point is to mention that it being our 50th anniversary, though we have a very long tradition and a long history in this area. So indeed, you see the stone chat there on the first cover of the Breeding Bird Atlas back in 1968. So from day one, really, in Birdwatch Ireland, citizen science, volunteer recording has really been at the core of what we do. I think it's also important to point out that there's literally a volunteer bird survey for absolutely everybody. Be it complete beginner or the experienced bird watcher, there's literally a survey for everyone, from the likes of the garden bird survey. So if you only know a few common species in your garden, you can still take part in that and really contribute a very valuable, meaningful set of data. There's the likes of Spring Alive, so for the younger generation, recording the first swallow, swift and cuckoo that arrive each spring. Kids all over Europe take part, so they plot the first one that they see, so you can actually track the migration, move from the south of Europe right the way across. It's an incredible survey, it's fantastic. Then the likes of the more established long-term monitoring schemes, the likes of the CBS, the Countryside Bird Survey, and IWEBS, the Irish Wetland Bird Survey, that are funded by the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Long-term schemes, in the case of IWEBS, celebrating 25 years this year, that give us information on the trends. In the case of CBS, are common and widespread species. In the case of IWEBS, are water birds. Training communication is really key in relation to these surveys and in relation to how we approach our citizen science work. So we run a range of training sessions right the way through the year. And the way that we communicate with our volunteers would be through social media, as mentioned earlier, our Wings magazine and many other platforms. So what are the benefits to citizen scientists? So I suppose in order to answer this, as a volunteer surveyor, in many of these surveys, I had to think about what do I get from taking part in these surveys. And first, and possibly most importantly for me, it's the knowledge that if I'm out and about bird watching or just out and about in the countryside, and I'm taking a record of what I see, knowing that by taking a note of that and entering it online, that it's actually making a difference, making this data count, that it's going towards the conservation of those species, that's absolutely key to me. It's also, I think, important to point out that it's a great opportunity to become a part of this fantastic network of volunteer recorders around the country. So quite often what we would see would be people might start off in the early days, they might take part in the garden bird survey, spend 10 minutes a week counting the robins, the blackbirds, the blue tits in their garden, having a coffee in their kitchen. And then through time, they get a bit of confidence up, they realise they can identify quite a few species, they start taking part in more surveys, they might become a member of Birdwatch Ireland, they get much more involved and they become a part of this great network of recorders. As mentioned earlier, there's really significant benefits, both health and well-being benefits, to being out and about in nature. The research has proven this beyond doubt, whether it's to reduce stress, to many other health benefits. And for me, I know I'm having a stressful day in the office, the kids are wrecking my head, just getting out in nature, it just does you good, it's a real tonic. But even an additional layer on top of that, you're out in nature, but you're also recording, entering your data, you're making a difference, and that makes me feel even better in that knowledge. So then I was asked to talk about, well, what are the benefits to Birdwatch Ireland or others in the sector with regards to all of this important volunteer data that we capture? And the first is the data that's captured through these volunteer surveys by many of you out there, it provides us with essential information to really, I suppose, take a health check on the status of our bird populations in Ireland. It really is at the core of who we in Birdwatch Ireland are and what we need to do. It's incredibly important to informing the work that we do, to informing the decisions that we make and our policy work. So for example, on the top there you see what's called the BOCI list, the Birds of Conservation Concern list in Ireland, and that's the red list. So they're the species that are most threatened, most vulnerable in Ireland. And indeed, the data that goes towards allowing us to establish these lists, most of it comes from volunteer survey work across the country. And also, this work, these volunteers, they're what strengthen our membership base, and they're also what give us real clout, our much stronger voice for nature. So finishing up, what are the aspirations for the future? More financial investment, and what I mean by that is I've drafted so many project proposals over the years that have had a citizen science element to it, and you go meet the funder and they'll go, that's brilliant, because sure, isn't citizen science free? And the answer is it's not free, and particularly if you want to do it well, it is certainly not free. It takes money to coordinate, to structure, to manage, and to deliver on it. So if we want to do citizen science well in this country, it requires financial investment. In relation to filling the gaps, birds, I suppose, are pretty well covered in Ireland to a degree, but that's not to say that there are not real significant gaps in our knowledge out there for certain species or groups of species. And citizen science is certainly one of the mechanisms and one of the ways that we can make a real difference to plug in those gaps. And then finishing up on something that Liam mentioned earlier about collaboration, I think we can all do better in relation to collaborating better. I think through better collaboration in this area, it can only do good and make stronger the data that we collect. So that's my lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks everyone else for the really useful presentations. It's now, we don't have plenty of time, but we have some time for discussion. So I'd like to open the floor, but could I perhaps, the point that you mentioned at the very end, Brian, was about we could collaborate better. And like, would you say a small bit more about that actually, how we might actually do? We talk about it the whole time, but we don't do it as well as we could do, I think. And do you feel, I suppose, that there's real value in us and trying to collaborate better? And be frank about what are the challenges to that happening?
So I think probably one of the first challenges is, certainly I'll speak for Birdwatch and possibly others, but with regards to Birdwatch in the NGO sector, I think sometimes we're quite generally flat out in our work. And it's a day-to-day struggle just to get through the work that's there and deliver on what it is you need to deliver. So taking the time and being allowed the time to kind of take a step back and look at what you're doing and decide, can we do it better and how could we do it better in collaboration with others? Sometimes it's a real struggle to find that time. I think it's just a fact of life is the sector that we're in, particularly in the NGO sector. So I think if we're allowed to give ourselves that time, we would see that by collaboration more, by working more with others in the sector and those outside, by getting support from business, etc., we could probably do better.
Okay, there's a number of questions actually on Slido which relate to this, I suppose. They're asking the question, why don't we share data more and collaborate more? And I think actually, Brian, that's a very good answer, is that it's a lot of the time it's just capacity within the organisations in that. Can I ask, is there any questions from the audience? Tom?
Tom Gittings. I'm involved in hoverfly recording with the data centre, and hoverflies, like most invertebrate groups, there's only so far you can go before things get really difficult. And the two main barriers are, one is equipment, so you need a microscope and all the associated equipment, and the other is you need an access to a reference collection. So I noted in Tina's talk, she talked about their group having equipment they loan out to volunteers. I was wondering if there's any panel of any thoughts how that could be done more widely in providing access to the type of equipment and resources that are needed for citizen scientists to take their recording up to the next level.
But maybe I'll just make a comment is, I think issues like this need to be addressed within a framework. That's why my suggestion, we should develop a strategy. And actually these issues that, when we started in the data centre, it was a case of, would we have money to provide people with a laptop, for example, even to manage their data, to move away from networks. And I do think it's the nuts and bolts, actually, which will help the recording community. I think all we can do is try to capture those needs and present them as a business case, I suppose, in one sense. Does anyone want to make a comment?
I just say we were very fortunate in the sense we were able to actually factor in the cost of putting together equipment as part of our funding. But we also we had great support with the heritage officers in the sense they bought them a pool of detectors for their areas as well, and they made them open for local volunteers to go into local libraries and collect a bat detector. So we were quite lucky in that aspect.
Question?
Nigel Monaghan from the Natural History Museum. Just to help Tom with his challenges there, we've got something like 12,000 hoverflies if anybody wants to come and see them. We are a public body. We've just moved all of our insect collections library and appointed an entomologist on Monday last. So that's one of the things that we are there for. That's part of our core role, providing reference collections, not just there, but with birds and everything else. So please do use us as an organisation. We haven't got 100 staff like some. We have 4 now. We've worked our way up to that. A couple of years ago we had 2, and we couldn't get very much done at all. But we do provide the habitat in which the rest of you can thrive.
Behind, yeah.
Hello, Orla Farrell of the Easy Treesy Cron project. We've planted 3,000 trees with 300 school children in the last week in Dublin and Cork. So we've done some basic school experiments where we've put a hula hoop on the grass and counted the species, and then we've counted them a year or two later and seen the change. But we'd love to engage with citizen science to do something like this around the country. It's part of the UN Trillion Tree Project.
Brilliant. Could I? Right, another question.
I had a small bit to that. I mean, there's the question there about using free labour, giving the government another reason not to adequately fund conservation. But I have a kind of a bit of a problem with using citizen science to support national obligations, if you like. I think we'd have a much more powerful long-term view if we actually use it possibly more at the school level and emerging recorders, if you like, that if we targeted that more, and we don't, so we're rubbish at it, so I'm a complete hypocrite, but if we had more time and energy targeting schools and the emerging, because where are the recorders of the future coming? You know, there is a generation thing about we call it the snowflake generation, but getting involved, taking ownership. There's definitely something there I don't quite understand, and a lot of recording schemes are reliant on champions, on the same individuals. We can name most of them are here actually. So I think that's a kind of good point, and I personally would be rather targeting our citizen science, not that they're very pro whales and dolphins, to a different cohort, and I think the younger people is the cohort. I think that's the future, personally. You know, not delivering government statutory obligations, using cost-effective citizen science.
Hi, Maeve Boylan here from Green Schools Biodiversity Programme. So timely that you mentioned schools. We'd have several hundred schools working on the biodiversity theme within the Green Schools Programme every year, 200 of which would be applying for a green flag for biodiversity work. And I have to say, I always would let them know about the recording schemes, but I'm very reluctant to really push them as an action, as you know, a box to tick on the biodiversity programme in the Green Schools programme, because I know the level of knowledge is quite low, and I'm not confident that they would be submitting accurate results. And then I'm thinking, is that like a massive workload added to you in the National Biodiversity Data Centre, that they're creating a whole load more work than is worth it? So I mean, I just think there's a funding, obviously we're all talking about funding. Funding needs to go into possibly training teachers or facilitating capacity across the country. There's definitely an interest there. The kids are definitely really keen to be involved, and they love finding butterflies, bumblebees and birds on their school grounds, but the level of knowledge within the school community is often low. Sometimes it's fantastically high, but more often than not, there's not the confidence or the actual genuine skills there to accurately identify things. So my question is it worthwhile? If I advise them to always submit a photograph with their record, is it worth their while, or is that just burdening the National Biodiversity Data Centre with a lot of time to go through all these records?
Well, first of all, Maeve, thank you for being so considerate to the small staff number in the data centre. You've hit a very important point, though. I mean, when the data centre was established, everyone assumed that we'd be doing training and education programs with schools. We'd be getting children to go out and record foxes and rabbits and building up that resource. And we actually took a very strategic decision. We said, no, actually, we want good quality data to feed into policy making. So we wanted to put our emphasis very much on generating good quality data, mobilizing data from other partners so they would feed into decision making, because we felt that you could do that and then move on to an educational role, but you couldn't do it the other way around, because if we got branded, let's say, as doing educational programs, that you wouldn't be able to upskill. So we're very conscious of the fact that there's huge capacity out there to do educational work, get kids recording, just to get out and about, be more aware of their surroundings, and it's a wonderful way for them to get out there. Frankly, we don't have the capacity to do it. We're scared to do it because if we did it, we can work with all of your partners, but we don't have the capacity to deal with it. And it is a specialised, there's a lot of groups here who do work much better than I do or that I know about. It is a specialised activity, I think, and it should slot into existing programs and the like, and there's definitely a need for it. But we just felt we did not have the capacity to do it. So whether it was a right or a wrong decision, we'll take the criticism, but we just were not able to do it, and we felt strategically it was the wrong way to go. Does anyone? want to comment? Oh, there's a discussion, question at the back. Oh, sorry, Brian. Yeah.
Anneli from Cork Environmental Forum. We coordinate the Coastwatch Citizen Science Survey every autumn, so I just wanted to give it a plug because it's been going as well for 30 years, so quite a while. And I think, as was said earlier, the citizen science initiatives are remarkable in the way that they can engage people, and that the coast watchers certainly become custodians of the coast and actually sort of watch over the habitat there as well on an ongoing basis. So that's something else I think that probably all the surveyors do. But I think just even listening to the groups today, the choice for people to get involved is so wide-ranging, and certainly the need for collaboration. And then the question I have really is around the need for also citizen science on our river catchments, because we have a current programme under the River Basin Management Plan. And is anybody collaborating with LawPro around doing a type of citizen science initiative that will be needed? I know there's water ecology initiatives, but there isn't, that I know of, one for the river areas. So it's something that comes up a lot in terms of on that programme.
I'm just conscious of the time, and thank you for that. Unfortunately, there's one more question. I'll take one more. Brian, to the left. Oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm Sarah Varian from Marine Dimensions. I run Purse Search Ireland. It's Ireland's Shark and Ray egg case sighting scheme. We've been running for 13 years now, and we've seen a lot of changes during that time. I think Liam's idea of a strategy is excellent. We really need a strategy at this point. Just to answer people's questions about why we're not collaborating, as I see it, there's different organisations have different roles within this field. So the reason why NGOs have their own programs, some of them were running them before the data centre was even set up.
Yeah.
And we're also involved with, engagement, education, outreach on the ground. So we're actually empowering the communities, inspiring kids at school to get involved in these programs. And that is very, very time consuming. And I think, we need to get together and see how we all connect and be strategic with this and see how it links in with policy as well, the Biodiversity Action Plan, and how we can fund this as well, because like we're saying, we don't have the capacity as well to actually analyse the data that's there and get it out and use it properly. So yeah, it's very exciting what's happening at the moment because you have so much interest, but the strategy is really, really critical.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. That's a very opportune time because I do need to wrap up. Can we forget technology for a second? Can we have a quick show of hands? Those of you who think it's worth one of the outputs from this session that we try to move towards developing a citizen science strategy for Ireland. Anyone in favour? Okay, so are you happy for me to present that forward as something worthwhile that will benefit us all and put a structure on the sector as such, sectoral activities? Just to help, every session there's a kind of there's going to be an output, a summary. Can I do a very quick summation of what I think we got from this hour? Just to say there was a clear, I think, view that actually there's a value in its own right in citizen science, both in terms of people, what volunteers get out of it, just actively getting out, and engagement. And that even someone mentioned the health benefits. So citizen science as an activity, depending, no matter what it is, there's still merits in pushing that. There's, from an organisational point of view, there's a really strong value in the volunteers and in the network out there. And it's very important to provide feedback and treat the volunteers well. There's an issue then around retention and retention of volunteers and continuity of programs. I think that was a theme that came out. There's the benefits, I think, in terms of the volunteer network that's there and the needs to provide training, and it is a resource, I suppose, that is really beneficial for everyone. There was mention about perhaps standardization of approach. There was also talk about kind of coordination, that we try to build on each other's strengths and don't duplicate. The issue was clear about burnout And have we reached saturation with the limited number of volunteers? I think that's a really important point. And laterally then, the issue of education and school children, that's a very key message, I think, that came up at the end, that it wasn't addressed actually early on. And strangely enough, I'm not too sure the issue of resources came out as strong as I thought they would. It was a theme running through the background, but perhaps actually resources are needed, but perhaps that's not the main issue. It's just maybe a small amount of resources perhaps to leverage the activity. Maybe I misunderstood that, but I was a small bit surprised that didn't come out as strong as I thought. Does anyone want to say any final remarks, because we have a couple of minutes?
I just wanted to comment about the schools programme, because through my work, obviously, the Heritage in Schools panels do so many projects within Offaly, and the green schools, you can see that as the schools are coming through to the biodiversity flag, I get contact from different schools, and it's very meaningful. And I think the teachers find it hugely helpful to have the resources that come in, and I'd often encourage them to try and get a Heritage in Schools person to come in. I think sometimes the idea maybe of registering and signing up for as they would see, maybe submitting data, they might feel they have to do it for a long term, or they might be, I sometimes find teachers are apprehensive that somebody might come in and they might be stuck for identification or something if they haven't got an expert with them in the schools. I see one school is on the top page for Recorders Wesley Preps are there. I think they're all the pre-first years, they're doing a recording programme. But I think that probably with the focus, the Green Schools is such a good programme, and that biodiversity flag, it's doing loads. So I wouldn't be overly concerned at that stage about data and numbers and getting it all in. I get the wonder and the appreciation and the habitat and the caring for it. That emphasis, I think, is fantastic at that age. And then as they come up through, they can do more, I would think, data recording there. Yeah.
A national project aimed at schools with the resources to engage them all. There's targeted ones like Ladybirds, for example, aren't they? And that would be really useful, because it's something we are missing out. Going to heritage schools, you can go into a school, but it's that big picture. But you can't turn the school tap on and then just switch it off again, because once you get kids motivated, my God, if you're not ready for them, then they'll bury you,
I suppose it's just getting the little ones out, enjoying nature. If we can get that much, then it's amazing how that will just bring them into adulthood. It's more about well-being at that point. So.
And they're the next generation.
Yeah.
Just my sum up would be, coming back to your very final points about the funding and the support, would just be the need for that if we're to do it well. And I think there's good citizen science and there's less good citizen science, but if we want to do it well, and I think that funding is key to see it from start through to finish.
Thank you very much for everyone. Thanks for our 4 excellent presentations. Really set the scene for our discussions, and thanks to you for the audience for engagement. Thank you very much.